Hi guys, welcome back to another video of Node Express MongoDB Bootcamp 2023. So in this video, as I mentioned in the last video, that I'll be talking about promises, async await. We talked about callbacks in the previous video. Again, we'll be talking about callbacks and callback hell and the problem that it causes, and we'll try to convert that into the promises and then the async await. So currently I've already created a new folder, and inside that I've just added this data.txt just for reference, and in the terminal I'm already inside promises async await folder. Okay, so I'm going to add an index.js file inside it. Okay, and then I'm going to include an fs package. So fs, and now let's explore what is callback hell and what are the problems it causes. So first of all, let's fetch the data from this data.txt. So I explained this in the last video as well, one of the last video. So I'll not be explaining, I'll just be keep on writing over here. So the data.txt, and then we need to add the utf-8 and then the callback function, because we have not used the read file sync. So first one, it's going to give us the error. So error, throw error, right? And now I'm going to write this data, which is in the data.txt, into another file, which I'm going to create, write file. So I'm going to name it output.txt, which is the name of file in which I'm going to pass the data, and then I'm going to give it a data with some modifications. So data is modified, and then this, and then the data from the first response. So yeah, and the next we have this error 2, and I can use the arrow function. All right, and again I can detect if there is an error. Okay, and here I can log the data is saved in a new file. Okay, so let's run this file and see if it works. So node index.js, and yeah, it has created, and the modified data have been saved in the output.txt. All right, so we have a callback function, and inside this callback function we have another call to this function, and it is returning another callback function. We have another logs, and we can have another callback function inside fs module. But before that, let's try to call an API. And for calling an API, I can use Axios package or even the request package. So let's try to create a package.json file just like I did in the last video. Okay, so I'm going to write npm init, and it's going to ask me the project name, and I'll just keep on hitting enter. Okay, so the project package.json file have been created. Let's install the request and Axios packages. So npm install request and Axios. So it's going to download these two packages, request and Axios, from the internet. So while it's downloading, let me import that in index.js file. So request require, and I'm going to give it a name request, and now I can use the Axios as well. So require Axios. Okay, so I have required, and it has created node modules folder and also the package.json file, and here you can see it has added the dependencies, and it has installed the latest versions of Axios and the requests. Now let's add another callback function to an API, and I'm going to use request for now. So inside the request, I can use the https www. Well, we have a website called the JSON placeholder dot typecode.com/posts. Okay, and then we have the error response and the body coming up from this, and if there is an error again, we are going to throw the error, right? And now the const posts equals to json.parse and body, it contains the data, and now we can log the data posts. Okay, so now let's try to run it. I hope that this URL is fine. I haven't done any mistake in it. So let's run it, npm node space index.js. Okay, data is saved in a new file and it works well, and it has printed out all the data. So I think there are 100 posts. Okay, so now we can keep on adding more calls inside it, and this process of having a callback inside the callback and then again the callback inside another callback is called the callback hell, and it doesn't look good, and when it grows and grows, it's quite hard to maintain actually. So it's not recommended. The purpose is same, but the way we achieve the same functionality is different. That we used to use callback earlier, and then the promises came in, and it resolves this callback hell issue, and then async await comes in, and we have another shortcut for managing the promises or the API calls or these synchronous or asynchronous functions, right? So now I'm going to just comment this, and this is asynchronous non-blocking code, as I mentioned in the last video. Just to explain you guys again, let me only print the first post here, and outside this I'm going to log the running. Okay, and let's see what happens. Now you can see that the running printed first because it was taking time to fetch the data, and this is asynchronous non-blocking code, the read file, write file, and also this request. It is letting the next lines of code to keep on running, and it is not stopping the rest of code to stop. Okay, so this is called the non-blocking asynchronous programming, that the independent code should keep on running, but it should not stop the rest of code. If we make it synchronous, then it will not work, right? So it will be printed after the whole process of it. Okay, so let's try to, I'm just going to comment this callback hell code. It was just to explain you guys. And now let's talk about the promises. So before that, I'm going to create a function that is going to return a promise. I can create my own promise as well. This is just to elaborate you that how you can create your own promise. Just like we had this API JSON placeholder posts, we have the same API for getting the single post if we pass an ID after the post keyword. Okay, so get single post, and after that it's going to receive the post ID. Obviously when we call this function, we need to pass it a post ID. I am assuming that you already know what is this arrow function. It is the ES6 JavaScript syntax. So now from within this function, I'm going to return a new promise, which is the built-in JavaScript. Okay, and then this promise is giving us two params. One is the resolve and other is the reject. Okay, and inside it, let me copy this URL, and in this function I'm going to be using axios.get, and then I'm going to copy this URL, and after that at the end I'm going to write $, curly braces, and then the post ID, because we need a single post ID from this API call. Okay, and then we, rather than actually in above, we use this arrow function to get the data, but we can also use this then, and this is going to give us a response, and then it is going to give us this response object. So we can get the post from the response.data, and we can return it using this keyword resolve. It means that this data have been successfully resolved and there was no error in it. Okay, and after that then we are given with another keyword. First let's resolve this, and it is going to return the post, and then it's giving us a catch, and catch is going to give us an arrow function, and we can give the reject error. Okay, and we have created this custom function that is returning a promise, and inside this promise it is calling an API for getting an individual post by passing the post ID, and then we are just resolving the post by getting the data from this response dot data. Okay, now let's try to use this promise, but the purpose is to actually having a multiple promises, so we can actually handle this callback hell. So this is just for the reference to let you guys know how we can create a custom function that returns a promise. Okay, and now outside this I'm going to use the axios dot get, and here I'm going to paste this. I'm going to get all the posts, and I'm then going to call that then function, and it is going to give us a response, right? And then I'm returning another response from inside it. Okay, so when we return this any data or a response or an object or an array, right, and in order to receive this data again we can use another then. Okay, so we have this response, we can have this response again, and now I can just log the response if it works or not, and let's see if it works. All right, so now you can see that it is printing all the above code is already commented, and this function is not being called, so that means that this console log is the only line which is printing this. So it means that this API call is working fine, and this response is being given to the next then. Okay, and if we return anything inside it will then again will be passed to next then, and this is how we can make up this clean code rather than adding this callback hell. Okay, so let's do that. Rather than actually printing the response, let me call this function now to actually fetch the data of a single post. Okay, so inside this then I'm going to call a single post, and inside it I need to pass an ID. So response 0, you can see that it is then with the key ID, so I can pass the ID inside it, and I can then have a then function inside it. Okay, so I can have a nested then function inside it. So here I can have dot then, and then it will going to give me the post, and here I can return something. The title of this post is something that we can concatenate, so post dot title, and since it is returning just like it, we can have another then over here, and in this then we can get the response again and the arrow function, and then we can call another API, and let's say it is going to return the response from it. Okay, and then we can receive this response again. Okay, and then we can log the response. It's just for explaining you guys, but it's not a good practice, you know, that I'm just returning the strings and the same response I'm returning. It's just to let you guys know how we can combine different promises called to different APIs, as well as the custom functions, and how we can make the look and feel of our code pretty well, and how can we pass the data from the first promise to the next promise. Okay, so here it is going to print the response. Now let's see if this response should print this string. Okay, so let's run this, and I'm waiting. Yeah, so it's working fine. So the title of this post is, and this is the title of the post, right? Because this is the first response, and the first response will be having this title. It's two up. I cannot even navigate to that, right? And lastly, I can catch this. So catch an error, and here I can console.error, and just like we have this nested then and then the catch, we have this then and this then, we should be catching over here as well. Okay, so this error parentheses was missing, so we can have this error over here. Okay, so this is how you can see that how complex was it that, and in this function there are 1 2 3 4 5 promises calls are being made. If we were have to do this using a callback, it will become much messy, and it was not looking good, and it would have been quite hard to maintain. So having promises, multiple promises, is a good way to manage multiple calls to a function which are returning promises. So now let's talk about async await. Async await actually works just like promises, but it has a different way of managing promises. Behind the scenes, its purpose is also to handle the promises coming from the APIs, coming from the custom functions, and also if it's coming from any API call or any read write file like this. Okay, so its purpose is to handle the promise. We are done with the callback hell, and also how to create and manage promises. Now I'm going to comment this part first. I'm leaving it as it is. Maybe we might have to use this in the async await. So let's now talk about async await. All right, so I think I need to comment this because I want to write the same function in a much better and cleaner way using async await rather than using this then functions. Okay, so I'm going to replace this function and write it again using async await. So let's come down, and I'm going to write it down. Const get single post equals to async, and then it's going to receive post ID just like previous function, and inside it I'm going to create a variable, and I need to call an API for the post ID. So I'm just going to copy this thing from here. Don't include this dot then function. Okay, so now it's going to give us the same response that this function was giving us over here. We used to add dot then response is coming, we are converting the response and resolving the post, then we are returning the data from this function. So it's so clean and simple. In a single line, it's going to wait until this API is not giving us the response, and once the API response comes back to this function, then the compiler will let to move to the next line. If we have to like console.log response.data, then this is not going to print until this returns the response. Even though we have not added this console log inside any then body or in the callback function, still it's going to wait. So technically, if you want to understand it, it is actually the synchronous code, means that until this is not going to return the response, the next lines of code will not be executed within the particular block of the function. So this is the function. But if we try to write something outside it, then it's going to, let's do it. So I'm going to just hit this thing, and node index, you can see that it has printed, and because we are not calling this function, and it will not even work. So let's try to utilize this function right below. So for utilizing this function, we have to use await again, because we have to work with it, and we have to pass this ID, and then it's going to give us some data which is not returning currently. If we return from here, return response.data. So let's try to add a call to it. So const post equals to get single post, and then if I pass the ID, and it's going to be passed. Okay, and I know that it's not going to work, but just to show you, so I'm just going to save this file and hit enter. So you can see that it has returned the promise undefined. The reason is that we are calling this function, and it is returning us the response, but we are not receiving it using the async await. Okay, it is, this console log is printing out something which is not even returned from this function yet. Okay, we need to wait until this function is not returning the data. So to do that, we have to use a wait keyword. So just like above, oh, so we have to write await over here as well. I forgot that, because this await is going to wait for this API call to return the data, because we are using async. So both works all together. If we write await, if I remove async, it's going to give us error that it should be within the async. Okay, so now let's try to run again. You can see that it's giving now error, because the undefined was something that I was confused with, but now it's returning the actual error which was expected, and this is what actually I was expecting. So now let's move this API call, this function call within the anonymous function, because anonymous function will be having this async keyword, and we want a function that calls itself automatically. We don't want that function to be called automatically. So to add the anonymous function, the empty parentheses async, and then like this, and after this I'm going to add this parentheses. So I'm going to just cut it and paste it over here. All right, and now if I run this code, it is taking some time, and it is printing out the data with the ID 1, and you can see that it is actually printing out this console log first. Okay, the point I was talking about before, that it is synchronously working, is for the next lines of code within that particular function, not outside that function. Outside code will keep on running even if this await call is not returning the response in any number of time. Okay, so this line of code will not execute until this return the response, and this is how we can call the async await. And let's now try to cache the error from this API call. Okay, so I can do the old way of doing that. So we can have this response in the try, and then we have this catch error, and here I can just log anything, the error. Okay, now response is not available outside, so let's create its variable outside this function first. So I'm going to create a response outside, and then remove the type of it inside the response. And here you can see that it is now returning the response from within, and I think we are done with this function for now. Rather than actually returning it outside, let's move it inside, because even if the catch will work, then it will return the data, right? So we are done with this function. Now come back to this anonymous function, and let's try to call this function. But before that, let's try to call another API for the post, because currently we are only passing the one directly. We don't want to pass it one, instead we want to pass the posts. So I'm just going to copy this line, and I'm going to call the posts response, and then await. And now with this one single line, it will give me the response. Let's change its name to posts, and it will give me the data of the posts. Let's change it to response dot data, and I'm going to change its name to response. Okay, now we have this post. Okay, so from here we can fetch the IDs of each post and pass it to this function. So let's try to do this, and I'm going to post and the one dot ID. So this is how I'm passing the ID, and here I will be outputting the response. Okay, so now it will first call this API, it will wait, and once it will return the response, this is going to be passed to this function. It will again wait and until this returns the response, and you can see that how clean and understandable this code is, even better than this dot then functions. Okay, so we can again and again use these Axios, await and async functions, even the 100 lines of code all together parallel. It will wait for first response, then move to the next line, wait for the second response, move to the third line. All right, so now let's run it, and it should print the post of the ID1 of the post ID1. You can see that it's ID2, but it's on the index 1. If you know the array, the 0th index had the ID1, now the 1st index have the ID2 over here. So that's it. Just like the try catch, we can also add the try catch over here, and you can do it yourself. Now one last thing about the async await I want to mention here, it is very important. Let's say that there are two API calls being made which are independent, which are not depending upon the previous API calls data. Let's say that we have this API call and then this API call, both are awaiting the response. Now this API call is depending upon its response because it needs an ID from the first API call. But if we have a function that is actually that needs to that independently returning the data, then we don't want the second API call to wait for the response of the first API call. It will take a lot of time for the last API calls to work because all of them are independent. So JavaScript gives us a better way, so we can run all the API calls with async await all together concurrently and parallelly. Okay, so how we can do this? So now let's create another function. So async function and get posts. Oh, it should be like this. All right, and inside it I'm just going to copy this and paste it over here, and I'm just going to name it post1, and I'm going to pass an ID to it. This is the post1. So I'm just going to copy this line and paste it, and the paste it 2, 3. So all APIs call are independent because I'm manually calling. This is just for elaboration to you guys. So post 2, post 3. Now I don't want this API call to post 2 to wait for the response from the first API call, and same for the third. So how we can run all these concurrently? So first of all, let's receive the response. So response 1, response 2, response 3, and I'm going to call the await promise dot all, and inside it I can pass the variables post 1, post 2, post 3. Okay, so now this function is going to call all these API calls concurrently because these are independent. So now let's take the data1 equals to response1 dot data, const data2 equals to response2 dot data, and just similar thing for response3 dot data. Okay, now I can simply log data1, data2, data3. Okay, now I'm just going to copy this anonymous function. Instead, this is not returning anything currently. Okay, so I'm just going to comment out the above code, and since it is not returning anything, I can actually try calling it directly. So get posts. So let's save this file, and now I'm going to run it. The last console log is already printed, so you can see this one. So now you can see that it has printed all the data at once. It's not happened like if I run it again, just try to look into it very carefully, that all the data is going to print at once, because this is the same API call and the same number of objects, same kind of data almost, so it should take similar time, right? So let's run it again and just see. So you can see that it called all three APIs concurrently, and it is printing like this: 3, 2, and the 1. So it's a better way. The independent calls should be done concurrently using the promise.all function and using the async await. So how clean is that? It is very easy to understand. If we had to do this with the promises or even the callback hell, it would have quite hard to maintain this code. So guys, it was a bit advanced topic, and this is a kind of JavaScript concepts because we are using JavaScript on the backend side. So just to explain you guys that you can also utilize the same kind of code in the front end JavaScript code as well. In React, Angular, Next.js, you can write the promises, async await. So the reason I have explained these async await promises quite well in a separate video, because I cannot imagine any project that does not contain or does not require async await or promise, because all the built-in libraries or even the third-party libraries will be having custom functions which are returning the promises, or they might be returning some callbacks. Okay, so avoiding the async await or promises is not possible. You have to understand it fully and use it wherever you want very efficiently. And obviously you will be using await and async. It's quite clean and simple. So guys, that's pretty much it for this video. I'm putting a lot of effort creating this crash course bootcamp 2023. So just to support me, don't forget to subscribe my channel and comment below if you have any question, and I would like you guys to give your feedback about the quality of video and the content I'm creating. I'll try to address those and improve my videos for upcoming videos. So thank you so much for watching.